Welcome, atheists, agnostics, skeptics, allies, everyone is welcome here. At Seattle Atheist Church, we call ourselves an atheist church because you will never hear anything supernatural preached from the pulpit. We are founded on the principles of scientific naturalism and secular ethics. But did you know that in our first dozen meetings or so, we spoke about a third principle of metacognition, and we value learning to think clearly. So this talk kind of falls into that category. Now, I know that I mentioned before that I used to belong to a budgeting group, and I know well that people can get triggered talking about money. Everyone here knows what the word triggered means. To have a strong emotional reaction, maybe even a flashback to some past trauma. So if this brings up some ouchy stuff, please, follow up with your therapist, go for a run, take a nice hot bath, or do what you need to do to take care of yourself. But in an atheist church, we want to be really clear that there is no minister or seminar or person here that can do your thinking for you. You are all responsible for your own research, your own conclusions, your own choices, and especially responsible for your own emotions and emotional responses to this talk and discussion. So, I'm not a financial professional, far from it. My father was born in the rural South in the 1930s. And at that time, 69% of the South was rural. He came from a small family for where he was from. There were only 6 children. And though my grandfather had had a pretty good job, they'd gotten through the Depression, but my grandfather died when my father was 9, and he didn't have any life insurance. So those were some really hard times for my grandmother after he died. And my father grew up to become an insurance salesman. And one thing he was always good at selling was life insurance. So I can predict that there might be some talk about social equity in this discussion afterwards, and our responsibility as a society to have a safety net so that people don't just completely fall through the cracks when something like that happens. But I'd like to just start with the idea of life insurance if you have people who are financially dependent on you to insure them against financial ruin. Now, how do you insure yourself against financial ruin? So according to the Washington Post, 60% of bankruptcies are triggered by healthcare costs. And I won't go into it here, but I even have a story of us being very well insured, paying Godzooky's high insurance premiums every month, and then still having huge financial thing that we ended up having to pay off. So I was unprepared for that psychologically because I assumed having really good insurance would mean that wouldn't happen. So even for families that have insurance through a job, illness can lead to job loss. And following a job loss, insurance loss, when the sick person can't continue to pay the premium. So I like to thank Obamacare that now no one can ever be denied new insurance based on a pre-existing condition. Yes. And by the way, 1 in 2 adults has a pre-existing medical condition. So that's 133 million Americans that were saved from the potential of financial ruin through illness. Because even if you have insurance through your job, if you lose your job, or you lose your ability to work. So you could lose your insurance and then be in big trouble. So let's talk about some smaller things than life and death. Let's talk about feeling confident with money. Do you like how I set that up there? Like, compared with life and death, this is kind of a small thing. And I'm going to try not to sound like a Mint spokesperson, people here know what Mint is? And I know there are other variations of it, but I only found Mint fairly recently. It's a website where it will actually suck in your bank account information, and it can analyze your last 6 months of spending patterns and help you see where your money has been going and help you create a spending plan, and it's free. So if you don't want to use something like that, you could use just paper and pencil and your bank records and track where your spending is going. And the nice thing about Mint is it also allows you to set up spending categories, and so you can know when you're reaching your limits for particular categories at any given time. The point here is to make sure that financial choices are choices. So someone might choose to take every spare cent and save it up for a big trip, a big adventure that they take every couple of years. Someone else might invest it, and someone else might prefer to have small treats in lieu of bigger ticket items. I call it just-in-time mini vacations. It's an individual choice. Whatever your choice is, own your choice. Look at your pay stub and see what percentage of your income is going to taxes. And if you're self-employed, as I was for many, many years, you need to make sure you're putting aside the money for the taxes. Whatever is left, that's your take-home pay. Okay, get your budget out and look at it. And are there places where you can and want to cut spending? If possible, try to reduce banking fees and credit card fees. And if you have been paying your credit card on time in as little as 6 months, you can negotiate more favorable rates. So there's that idea of trying to take care of the banking fees and the fees. Now, let's talk about getting a good deal on a car payment, because most people get a car before they get a home. And by the way, I want to stop and say there's absolutely nothing that says you have to have a car or a home that you're buying. But if you are buying a car, make sure you consider buying a used car, and consider keeping the car until it's on its last coughing breath, as long as it's safe to drive and not costing too much in repairs. Or not. Lots of people who can afford it want to lease their car and always drive something new. So, I'm just saying, consider a used car. Whatever you do, never reveal to a salesman how much you can spend on your monthly payments or how much you can put down as a payment before you negotiate the final price of a car. I had an odd situation when I bought my first car, 25 years ago, whatever it was, where my father sent me in to negotiate. I was buying it with my own money from my first job, my first kind of real job. And I walked away 3 times in the negotiation, where I was just like, no deal, and I walked away. And my people pleasing was in full bloom. Only the thing was that now I was more interested in impressing my father than than whatever the salesman situation was. So find out what the car is worth and try to pay only about 10% more than that price. Shop around for financing. And just remember that though the salesman may be friendly, he is, make no doubt, trying to get the most money possible out of you. That's not because he's a bad guy, but just because that's his job, and you need to look out for yourself. Okay, looking at the budget. Some rules of thumb are try to spend no more than 30% of take-home pay on housing. And people get really creative to make this happen, especially when people live in places like New York City. I know, people live in closets in Berkeley, California,